Committee of the Whole meeting to order for November 28th, and the clerk will note the roll. We have Ms. Wall, Mr. Smith, and Wahal Gidak not yet here. Some of them may be coming on Zoom. Okay. Ms. Hale, could you do the land acknowledgement?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunashish. And I might add that there was a really excellent article on the meaning of Gunashish, and it's more than just thank you. So on K2.
Thank you very much. Any changes to the agenda, comments? Changes, anybody? No. Okay, we'll go on to the first item, gondola installation funding. Draft agreement with Gold Bell 2 is doing that. Mr. Watt. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I will express thanks to everybody who's been working on this, Mr. Palmer, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Scanlon, Mr. Pierre, Mr. Salinger, the Gold Bell board, and lots of other people. And I think this is one of these rare opportunities to find an elegant and effective solution to a difficult problem. It's been fun working with everybody. It's exciting to work with Gold Belt on funding installation costs of the gondola. I think it's exciting on the city side because simply CBJ doesn't have to do it. I think if the assembly were posed with the question of funding installation of the gondola out of fund balance or ballot initiative or some other means, we would really lack enthusiasm. I think to put it mildly, and to have Gold Belt as a partner is really exciting. And I think a very positive and powerful thing to have the municipality and our local Native corporation working together, meeting our interests in a way that's very harmonious and it's kind of dovetailed nicely. So there's a memo in the packet and a spreadsheet, and it's a bit complicated. I'm going to kind of give the high level. I'll just talk about the spreadsheet first. So the spreadsheet is fairly complicated. There's a lot of data in it, and I won't go into what those numbers mean at the moment, but they are what we are all agreeing on is a reasonable expectation of what may happen. So there have been many projections. Certainly Mr. Scanlon likes a good Excel spreadsheet from time to time. Certainly on the Gold Belt side, as a profit-making business, the bottom line is super important to them as they look out to their interests of their shareholders. For CBJ as well, trying to contemplate this business venture, it's important to try and project. So on the spreadsheet, there are just a couple things that I would highlight. We've agreed that the assumptions are starting in the first year of full operation, 75,000 passengers, which on a 100 or 100-day cruise ship season, it's really not that many passengers, and it's not that big a piece of a growing market. Revenue per visitor of $65. None of us think that's a real aggressive number. And then all of the rows from there just cascade forward at a visitor growth percentage of 3%, which may or may not be accurate, but seems reasonable what we've seen over the years. And in terms of market share, natural growth in cruise ship industry and boat sizes, we think these are reasonable numbers for all of us to be using. So that's what the spreadsheet is. In the memo, so let me walk through the memo. So the memo encapsulates the intent of our discussions. And the intent is that Gold Belt will provide $10 million to CBJ to construct the gondola project. They will provide that money to us in 3 payments. CBJ would then buy the installation of the gondola and infrastructure. In order to make the agreement, we all have to think through what our issues are, and how to protect both parties against things that could go wrong, as well as come up with reasonable economic terms. So at root value, what we've been talking about is a revenue sharing agreement that would last 25 years. And in that revenue sharing agreement, Gold Belt would be repaid a minimum of $20. They would double their money. So initially, you might look at that and say, well, double your money sounds great. I'd like to double my money too. In fact, everybody in the markets likes to double their money. And it's a goal. But what we also have to understand is that doubling money for Gold Belt, they're going to be losing time value of that money. They're going to be experiencing inflation in all of their businesses. They're going to be looking at their investment here in our gondola project and thinking about what they could be doing with their other business enterprises, what they could be making in the stock market. And so in the end, though, I think we all feel like this is a good arrangement. The general idea is that Gold Belt would get a sliding scale of the percentage of the receipts. So of the first visitors that go up there, 10% of the receipts, sliding up to 25%. And there's a reason for this. We want to start low because when we open this facility, we are going to have fixed costs. We're going to have maintenance. We're going to have staffing needs that need to be cared for. And we want to make sure that we can afford those staffing and maintenance costs. And in the event that visitation is low, Gold Belt's time period for recouping their money will stretch out and go longer. And so we're trying to sort of hedge those two ideas, the need for Gold Belt to make their investment and the need for CBJ to cover the operational costs. I think it's also important to talk about why Gold Belt is an ideal partner in this venture. Not only are they a major entity in our citizens, civic culture, having many shareholders in town, but they also operate the Mount Roberts tram. So having Gold Belt in an agreement where they're incentivized to help steer business to our gondola is very important. And given that they have business interests in both, if we take this agreement, then it will line up in a way that's rational for their corporate interests. If we were to go alone, we essentially would be competing. But if Gold Belt is helping steer visitation to the gondola and they're incentivized to do that, it works for both Gold Belt and for CBJ. The memo also talks about termination clauses. We both need them. Nobody wants to envision terminating an agreement like this, but all of our attorneys assuredly will advise that it's a normal contract term and you need that. So that's probably the preamble, and I'm sure the Assembly is going to have a lot of questions. We've had Mr. Palmer involved, and Gold Belt has had their in-house counsel involved. We have kind of preliminary documents that we traded back and forth. But provided the Assembly is satisfied with the general idea, the next steps would be to forward an ordinance to the Assembly for introduction and public hearing that would authorize the manager to enter into a revenue sharing agreement with Gold Belt. And we could have additional committee process in there as we see fit. So we could intro and just refer it to the cow. So then you can look at the terms and conditions, the draft terms and conditions. We could intro, have public hearing, hear from the public. And if you felt it wasn't ripe, then take it back to the cow or even the finance committee, because this is primarily a financial vehicle. Before we get back to the assembly for adoption. Whatever we do need the path that allows for public comment, and we may get a lot, we might not get any. It's really hard to say. I think it's going to be interesting how the public reacts. So those are some introductory thoughts. Mr. Rogers certainly can speak in detail about some aspects. Mr. Palmer can help out. Mr. Salinger, Mr. Pierre, and Mr. Scanlon always likes to talk about this project as well. But generally, the question for the assembly is, are you ready for us to bring an ordinance to introduction, and then whether it goes straight to public hearing or committee? I think that's the goal for tonight, to see if we can get there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Watt. What questions does anyone have for Mr. Watt right now? Ms. Treem, Ms. Uskandis. Oh, I'll also note that both Ms. Wall and Wahal Gidak have joined us on Zoom. Can you both hear us? You're all good?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I can hear.
Perfect. Let me know if you want to ask a question. If I don't look your direction, just pipe up. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I have a couple sets of questions, so I'll just do the first one, which I think might be for Mr. Rogers. The memo talks about 3 separate payments starting next month. And I'm just curious what the kind of mechanism is for those, and how much are each of them going to be as they come in? Are they going right back out to whatever costs are necessary? And I'm asking, well, I want to know the answer to those, but I'm also curious because in Public Works today, we talked about a transfer to pay for overages on the shipping costs. And I'm just a little concerned that Eagle Crest, which has other capital needs, might run into some cash flow problems if they've taken that money out of their CIP account.
Is stepping up to the plate to talk. Go ahead, Mr. Rogers.
I think one important thing to note is that just as with any bond, you have an ordinance for the bond that gets us the money. And in many ways, this is like a bond. It's not, but it functions the same way. But at the same time that you see a bond ordinance, you also see an appropriation. So the assembly will also see an appropriation for Eagle Crest to expend $10 million building a gondola. Once Eagle Crest has that appropriation for $10 million, or perhaps we would do appropriations in the payment structure, we could figure that out. Eagle Crest could begin expending funds against that money, and we would receive money from Gold Belt just like we do bond proceeds. It really won't be any different on a cash flow basis for capital projects, or as it relates to any kind of indebted project like this. So long as expenditures, so long as we have a lawful appropriation and expenditures happen in the same fiscal year that we receive the cash payment, there's not our treasury washes that cash problem. So proceeding with the gondola doesn't create a cash problem, although we could not obligate for the project more than we know we have proceeds guaranteed to come back via the agreement. And so maybe with that information, a follow-up question would get me closer to where you want to go.
Mr. Watt wants to add something.
Thank you, Chair. So a couple things, and Assemblymember Wall asked by email a couple questions, and I'll just put her questions in there. So she was interested. Number one, what action we're looking for tonight, and where the authority of the assembly lies as opposed to the board and the manager. right? So in this case, authorizing the manager to enter into this agreement. And in that authorization would be an appropriation for the money. The engineering department under the manager manages capital projects for Eagle Crest. So this would be managed, the construction procurement would be under the manager. An award in these dollar amounts comes back to the assembly for approval. So anything over a construction project over $1 million is going to come back to the assembly for approval. So whatever procurement path we go down, I imagine that we're going to be talking about alternative procurement path, which I think makes a lot of sense in this case, but we'll have to make that case to you. You'll have to agree to that. And then the award of that contract will have to be approved by the assembly as well. So the assembly will have more touches on the financial and approval aspects of this.
Ms. Dream, do you have you're good?
Yeah, I think my question was maybe just a little more basic than that, but I think I get it. I was just wondering, like, if there's a payment in December, how much is it going to be? And is it like, do we have expenses in December also? Or is it kind of money's coming in and going right back out the door because we have things to spend it on? Or
Mr. Watt?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I don't actually know the payment schedule, but when you approve this ordinance, the finance director will make 10 million available in the capital project. And maybe the reference that's easiest to understand is when you pass a municipal budget, you agree that we're going to collect 55 million of sales tax in the coming year. And the finance director makes that available to the departments to spend as you've appropriated it. And then it comes in as it comes in. So I think you don't need to worry about the actual payment schedule. I'm sure we know it, just not at the top of our heads.
okay, I get that. I like that. I am still a little worried because if, for example, a lot of other capital needs come up and they need to be met, then I think that the assembly is going to get asked for that money in May during the budget cycle. And that's what I'm trying to avoid, if that makes sense. But I appreciate this. This was very helpful information.
Ms. Euskandis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start. I have a couple of different questions in different areas. So I'll just start by thanking everybody who worked on it. And I just wanted to say, I agree. It's a lovely thing to be working together. And when we are in a situation where it benefits municipality and in the corporation. So that being said, I have questions about, of course, it needs to be in there and people would not hope to be terminating this. I note that it says in the memo that if the summer operation receipts were insufficient, obligation would not be guaranteed by the full faith and credit of CBJ. I'm wondering sort of what is on the line, and that was helpful hearing the sort of where that authority lies once if you had that obligation. But for Eagle Crest, just thinking of their sectioning out, we're not saying that we're putting everything on the line as far as the city, but what is Eagle Crest putting on the line?
Mr. Watt.
I'll start this and Mr. Palmer can finish. So Eagle Crest is the city. Eagle
Right.
Crest is not putting anything on the line. What this agreement conceptually has is that Gold Belt will get their money, their 20 million in 25 years. But if it's not forthcoming, that will be extended. So if it takes 27 years or 30 years, it will be extended. What the line about full faith and credit means is this is not like a geo bond where if visitation to the gondola is slow and muted, that the assembly has to pay with property taxes. So the cure is the 25 years grows longer until Gold Belt gets paid. The cure is not the central treasury.
Mr. Palmer, did you want to add anything or you want to just nod your head?
I think that's good for now. And if there's more follow-up, we can definitely get to more details.
Do you have a follow-up, Ms.
It-
Yuskani's?
Just a follow-up just to that specific thing. So I'm going to restate to make sure I'm totally clear. So the amount doesn't, the source of finding their funding would not change. It could just go on. If things were terrible, it could go on for 50 years until you met that agreed upon amount. Is that correct?
Mr. Palmer?
Okay, so you're correct with one small nuance that there is a draft concept in the revenue sharing agreement that provides an offset for leases that Gold Belt has to us. So specifically the tram, that it would be offset on a dollar to dollar basis in addition to extending the revenue sharing agreement out until they reach the financial benchmarks that are set out in the agreement.
Okay, so two sources of input to Gold Belt. The revenue from this adventure and the decrease from a lease.
Correct.
Ms. Yuskani's?
Just one more follow-up on that, because I want to make sure I'm Chris on that, and that's very helpful. So let's say it's even more worst case scenario, nothing's coming in at the gondola at the Eagle Crest site, but we're still not reaching that goal. So then on the lease side, you would be completely decreased until it reached the dollar amount agreed upon. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have Ms. Hale and then Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Manager, thank you very much for your introduction and your explanation. It made this a lot more clear for me. The memo left me a little cold. I'm sorry, Mr. Rogers, but the explanation helped a lot. I think it is really exciting that City and Borough of Juneau is working with Gold Belt, Juneau's own Alaska Native Corporation. And maybe conversely, that Gold Belt is working with City and Borough of Juneau. So I just think it's really, really an exciting step. I really love it. I do have a question. I have to confess that when I heard that Gold Belt was planning on working with CBJ, I wasn't exactly expecting a revenue sharing agreement of this nature. I had envisioned that like maybe Gold Belt would be helping staff the gondola or something like that. And so my question is there in the works any kind of additional work on operations, that sort of thing, or are operations going to be solely in Eagle Crest, Bailiwick, and Gold Belt not involved in ops?
Mr. Watt?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So at this time, this is the sum of what we're talking about. I will say that everybody is pretty excited about the opportunity to make further agreements. And there are other ideas about further infrastructure investment on the mountain, tourist attraction type things. I do think that there is opportunity, but at this time, I think this is the first most logical deal, and it can stand alone as the only deal if that's the only one we ever figure out. But what Gold Belt brings to the table, I think is very, very helpful to CBJ. They're bringing funding and marketing and tour coordination. Those two things are very, very helpful. At present, we have a municipally owned and operated ski area, and changing that is, I think, difficult and complicated. You think about, all of our municipal processes about municipal land. If we're going to lease land, we have a very complicated process, right? Think about if we do a capital improvement project, we're going to go through our procurement process. If we hire people, we have a personnel management code. So those other ideas I think are interesting, and I'm sure will be discussed in the future. But this is the deal that we're talking about right now, and it stands alone.
Thank you.
Hey, Ms. Wall?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll echo my colleagues' excitement that Gold Belt is here at the table with us. Ms. Hale asked my primary question, but I have one other. I just wanted to quickly ask: has the Eagle Crest Board reviewed these terms, or does that happen after we would prepare an ordinance? Where is that in the process?
Mr. Watt,
I'm looking to Mr. Scanlon for
Scanlon.
a yes, no. The
the
board is
board
seeing it on Thursday.
Great,
the board,
thanks. And this is probably more of a comment than a question at this stage, but you know, of course, a lot of the impetus behind this whole project was, you know, bringing in revenue to support Eagle Crest. This table makes it seem like that's quite a likely scenario, which is awesome. I would love to see kind of what we think that net revenue would look like after our expenses are taken into account before we prove anything. So unless you can give me that information right now, I'll wait on it for next time.
thank you. Any comment on anything, Mr. Watt?
No, I'll just add, I think at this time, we don't have a fully built out business plan or staffing model, but I do believe that the revenue share would be more than adequate to operate the gondola. We do have a lot of experience in staffing and operating chairlifts. In a lot of ways, the gondola is really just kind of a complicated chairlift. So I think confidently there's sufficient revenue in a very conservative case to maintain and operate gondola.
Okay, we have another round of Ms. Stream and Ms. Euskandis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. My next round of questions, just want to make sure I understand the different areas where we have risk. I will say I like this thing. I'm asking questions just so I can understand it. But I do like the concept and the framework here. So the memo says, and Mr. Palmer touched on, fund sources limited, not guaranteed by full faith and credit of CBJ. But I do want to clarify, in the scenario either where we don't get started by May 2027 or under the 4 circumstances of termination, those we would be, those whatever costs we would incur for that, we are fully on the line for. Can you nod your head a
Mr.
little
Palmer,
louder?
Mr. Whoever, Mr. Watt.
That is correct.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Euskandis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do have, they're all over the page, so I could do a couple at a streak, or I can just do rounds. So I'm gonna switch to my questions are now about the numbers on the spreadsheet. So I guess, so Public Works today, the shipping cost was higher than expected. And so I'm looking at, we had a lot of questions before this was, the purchase of the gondola was approved about how the numbers had factored in for different growth models. What if it was slower than expected? Was it reasonable? So I know we've spent, everyone spent a lot of time looking at the numbers, but I guess a general question would be, tell me how these numbers factor for inflation, stagnation, or how, or I guess have these numbers been really adjusted since we've had such inflation and supply chain issues, and every project we've seen has been higher than expected?
Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So the revenue per visitor, we have growing at a 3% rate, which we think is probably pretty modest. On some level, if inflation precedes apace, then we would expect the revenue per visitor probably to proceed closer to inflation as well. For me in this, I most focus on year one. And I think the question is year one plausible? And what would happen if growth was lower than that? So getting, I touched on this earlier, getting 75,000 visitors to the mountain. If it was CBJ going it alone, I would not be very comfortable. But an incentivized Gold Belt corporation operating the tram on the waterfront, I think quite plausible. And small really in the context of the number of visitors that come. Revenue per visitor, $65. I think is a good deal compared to what a lot of our visitors choose to do on their day in Juneau. So I think marketed properly and effectively, I think this is going to be a very attractive option and not a big lift to get that. So those two numbers really just ripple right across the spreadsheet. Those are the two key assumptions. We talked about the sliding scale and how it's structured so that we get the early money and then the higher upside. Gold Belt is more incentivized to drive growth. So that is the way that I look at it. The next thing is if the visitor growth, the 4% proceeds slowly, then we're in that question of, okay, well, if it takes longer than that number of years for Gold Belt to make their money back, then that 25 years extends out, or we forego some of the Mount Roberts tram lease of the tidelands that we own underneath the tram. And I think we all felt like, everybody's looking at this, trying to hedge their bets, and I think from the Gold Belt perspective, it kind of makes sense, right? If they give us money to invest in this and it's not paying off, and out of the other side of their business, they're paying money, kind of makes sense on their side. And I think it makes sense on our side as well.
I'm going to jump in with a question since it's similar on this one. And that is, or I'll also say people have expressed happiness that Gold Belt's involved they're the local corporation here. But I also would note they're the only corporation running a tram in this town right now. And they've been running it for 20 years. So that is a huge other advantage. And that's the question about these numbers, the 75,000. I don't know how many visitors come to your current tram. You could tell us if you wanted to. And I assume that these numbers, you've worked on these numbers. It's not just our spreadsheet. And you, with your knowledge of tram running, which we have none, these numbers seem correct to you and doable. Oh, press the little button so you're green.
Madam Deputy Mayor, for the record, McHugh Pierre, President and CEO, Gold Belt Incorporated. And yes, our position in this decision-making process is the same as yours. So the Gold Belt Board today deliberated this topic and is in the same position and forwarding a resolution to the full board to authorize exactly what you're authorizing Mr. Watt to proceed with, or potentially authorizing. And so in the months we've been discussing this, we've been looking at what we expect to be reasonable. Because with the tram, this will be the 27th year coming up in 2023. And as you know, there's been ups and downs. And while it looks successful for the public, it took a long time to break even and recover that initial investment that Gold Belt put into it. And so that's why we came up with the 25-year revenue sharing agreement, knowing that our best laid plans may not come to fruition. So we believe that that's a good period of time to allow us to at least recover our initial investment and then make a reasonable business decision. Now, we also expect to receive this number of people with appropriate marketing and cooperation with the industry. And so before the pandemic, we received about 300,000 ticketed passengers at the tram. So that's different though, because we don't have any type of transportation issues, right? The only bottleneck is people queuing up and going up, right? How many people can you fit in a car? But with Eagle Crest, we have to think about how many people are in a bus, how the frequency of those buses, and then what is a reasonable amount of time to spend on the mountain in that experience. And so we believe a 3-hour experience is probably reasonable, maybe 2 hours on the short side, half an hour to get to the mountain, an hour on the mountain, half an hour back. Most likely it'll be 2 hours on the mountain for people. And the reason we're very excited to participate with the city in this is because we know that we can offer different experiences on the mountain by partnering with Eagle Crest. And so Eagle Crest can be that adventure experience that does not exist, while the tram can focus on cultural, more, I would say, traditional cruise or tour visitors to Juneau that is not as extreme, perhaps. So we're not going to have mountain bikes on Mount Roberts. The Gold Belt Tram is never going to authorize that. But we could see in the future where you might be riding a mountain bike down Eagle Crest. And so those are some of the things that we're excited about. And we think this is a really great opportunity to participate. And we believe 75,000 visitors in the first year is acceptable and doable.
And do you think you could get 75,000 visitors without any infrastructure on the mountain?
Yes.
And go ahead.
Oh, I apologize.
You
So we believe that the 75,000 is a reasonable number for the first year. I've already been working with the cruise industry, small ships, big ships, independent travelers, and we feel very comfortable that we can get that number through a bus to the Eagle Crest facility. I think the challenge is going to be, as we start to exceed that, making sure that we have a positive experience for people. Because I believe that once we hit the first year, it's going to be very successful.
Would you mind taking more questions?
I would love to.
Okay.
Yes,
I
please.
saw somebody with their hand. Do you have a question for Mr. Pierre? Go ahead, Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I actually, something he said triggered another question for me, not for him, but while you're up here. Thank you. What in year one, $5, what is a visitor getting for their $65?
So this is actually a larger ticket number than that. That's our shared revenue. So we believe a ticket is going to be closer to $100, maybe $105. Because what you've got is you've got a bus fee, you've got a commission that's being included in that, and then you have the take home. And so when you look and see what people are paying across the region for experiences, that's still on the low end of an excursion experience. So it's a very competitive price. And so people are getting access to somewhere they've never been and something that's unique and the opportunity to explore. And that's enough.
Okay.
Quick
Ms.
follow-up.
Treem, go
So
ahead.
it includes the bus ride and the gondolas.
Sorry.
Okay, includes transportation.
And that would be the 65 is what we're sharing from, what the city and Gold Belt is using as a number to share from.
More questions for Mr. Pierre while he's here? Somebody raising their hand? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, more questions in general. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So moving out of the nitty-gritty of not the structure of the revenue sharing and not into the details of the number, but moving a little bit towards process. This is very helpful. This helps me understand like I said, the idea of how you've structured this. But in terms of seeing an actual agreement, I believe, unless I misunderstood what staff was looking for tonight, was to intro an ordinance, having wrapped our minds around this concept, and then refer to committee. But why not draft an ordinance, or ordinance is drafted, because there's been a lot of work done on this, and bring it into committee before introing it, which is how we generally do things unless we're under a real time crunch. Could you speak to that?
Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I don't think there's any one perfect way. So it's the needs of the assembly to get detail and talk about it, and the need of the assembly to avail the public of an opportunity to comment. And it's always hard in our process of intro and public hearing. We can tend to get public comment at the end of our process. And that's what I'm hoping that you'll contemplate is how do you get public comment in a timely manner that helps in your deliberations?
So just to be clear, the ordinance, we would also see a draft of the agreement at that point. So that's when we'd see the draft of the agreement.
Correct.
So we could introduce it, see the ordinance and the agreement and bring it back here too. Ms. Wall is got your little hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was, so when we originally voted to fund the purchase of the gondola, we had kind of an estimate of how much it was going to cost to install, and there were potentially elements, whether that's a structure on top for bathrooms and other things, posters, various things were thrown out. What are we expecting to do with the 10 million, and how I believe we were doing engineering, how much do we know about what it's going to cost to install the gondola and the amenities that we think we need to bring in the revenue in these projections?
Mr. Watt, what does this $10 million buy us?
Thank you. So we've had a lot of conversations about that. Certainly Mr. Scanlon, working with Ski Area Consultants, is trying to estimate that. These are hard, and in this construction economy, generally very difficult to guess. So let me start with the basics. Installing the gondola has components of a mountain road. So we have very good experience. We built a road to the top of Eagle Crest, and we would be building another gravel road that would follow the alignment of the gondola, and that road would be used to construct and service the tower foundations. The gondola itself is bottom terminal, top terminal, these foundations along the way, the mid-station location. So what we're really trying to figure out, and Mr. Scanlon will be updating our estimates, but I would say I'm very comfortable that there is plenty of money to build the road and the gondola and minimal top, bottom, and middle stations. And the question is, of that 10 million, how much can we afford at the top terminal? And we very well may get to the point where we have to economize in that 10 million on what we build at the top. It's hard enough to estimate costs of building buildings on flat land in the city. On top of a mountain, you're kind of in another esoteric construction world. So I don't have the latest construction estimates, but I would say in this case in particular, those estimates are going to be just that until we have a contractor who is willing to put a dollar price on it. And when we get that dollar price, we come back to the assembly for approval. So let's take the scenarios that could happen. 10 million is more than enough to build everything that everybody wants. I kind of doubt it. Which case we come back and report that, and you're really happy to award the bid. Second case, 10 million is exactly right. We think, oh, that was really good. We never estimated that well in our life, but we're happy to take it in this instance. And we award the bid and move on, or we get a higher construction cost. And then we're in this conversation where what does it make sense to do, and how do we phase construction at the top of the mountain? No doubt, we're going to be talking to Global and saying, do you have an appetite for a little more on this? If, we build out at the top everything we envision. So I think this is going to be a bit of a moving target for us. But based on our experience, building chairlifts and building mountain roads at Eagle Crest, I'm very comfortable that initial phase of gondola and basic necessary structures at top, middle, and bottom are achievable, but the pressure is going to be on what we can afford at the top of the mountain.
Hence the question, are you sure you can get people without anything at the top of the mountain? Okay, Ms. Euskandis, another question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So could you talk a little bit about timing? Because that is a $10 million question. Like, let's say it's a $10 million gravel road based on the alignment that we want to put it. I see you laughing and I sure hope it's not. But let's say it is. So when will we know that? How will that work in relation to this? Talk me through that scenario.
Mr. Watt?
Deputy Mayor, thank you. So certainly the Eagle Crest manager has been chomping at the bit to get going on this procurement question. And you know, the sooner he launches that procurement, and the sooner we have a contractor giving us fixed fee prices in whatever procurement method, then we're going to come back to the assembly. He is also very cognizant of construction windows and timing. And I'm sure is counting the weeks until April and trying to figure out how we can get somebody building that mountain road as soon as the ski area closes in the spring. And he already knows that here we sit in nearly December, that's a tall order. We, I think, are all motivated to start that process as fast as we can and get some construction going next summer.
Ms. Euskandis?
Just real quick follow-up, and the wait is seeing this move forward, and then he'd be off to the races.
Through the deputy mayor, you bet. So before we move on it, we need assembly authorization, which would come in the form of an ordinance that approves this agreement that effectively appropriates the fund and makes them available for expenditure.
Ms. Tree?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think one of my kind of an issue that I feel is unresolved by this. I like the revenue sharing agreement. I think it's a fantastic structure, great public-private partnership. But it seems like maybe there's a chicken and an egg problem with the growth in visitors, because if we're attracting the visitors who are more adventurous, we need other things there than a gondola. And it says on this spreadsheet, all costs for summer operations will be paid from the revenue share. So if we want to build those other things, we need the people, but we need the people to get the revenue. So that issue in question is obviously outside the scope of this revenue. And that's the thing that's kind of like nagging at me in the back of my mind, is we need to figure that out too. So I assume that moving forward, we'll have this process where we're discussing that. And Ms. Wall, said, can we get the next column over that has our expenses next to our revenues? Do we have a plan for that process, or?
Mr. Watt?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. No, I don't think we have a plan for that process, but we know that that's imminent. We know that we need to come up with a plausible business plan for Eagle Crest and figure out how to staff that. We know that funding things that have been proposed, like the mountain coaster or other ropes course or other ideas that have come up, are going to be very attractive. And we know also that, this is kind of like one of these eat the elephant one bite at a time. In this, to get to the point where we're agreeing on the structure and the terms is that first bite. And we know that those other things are going to come shortly after, and we'll be back to the assembly to talk about that as well.
Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I appreciate Gold Belt being willing to partner with us on this project. Hope you make lots of money, because that means Eagle Crest is making lots of money, and that means you might project with us some more. And in fact, I hope you make so much money that we look at RSA with Eagle Crest to get our $2 million back. So you guys didn't think of that. Anyway, with that being said, that's a discussion for another day. I move that an ordinance that would authorize the manager to enter into an agreement with Gold Belt Inc. and ask for unanimous consent.
Comments about that? Questions? Any
Uh,
object-
Just a clarification on the motion based on my earlier question about where that would go, to bring that back to committee or to introduce it.
Madam Mayor's motion doesn't include that. Would you like to include,
I
more?
would introduce it, and then if we want to bring it back to the cow, I'm fine with that, but you do know that there's a little bit of a boom on it, but it would certainly come back to the cow. Doesn't matter to me. Or actually, since it's technically financial stuff, it could come back to finance. We'll let the chairs fight that out, but it could certainly
Well,
come to committee.
whatever is faster.
No, Deputy Mayor, I was going to say that we would sort out which committee had time and was more convenient.
Okay, any objections to the motion? Nobody online? Forward to reading the whole thing, as you can tell. Thank you. Okay, we're next to cruise ship season update and discussion. Ms. Pierce, is that you, Mr. Watt? Are you saying anything first, or?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Before I get into my piece of the discussion, could the clerks please move Heather Hoagland over to give us a rundown of our visitor industry survey numbers for this year?
Okay. Starts on page 11.
All right.
Thank you, Ms.
And-
Hoagland, for joining us.
Hi,
And
everyone.
we have your, what looked like your slides.
Perfect.
Were you going to share anything?
We were going to operate the slides here. And
Okay.
Ms. Cathcart Scott, there we go.
Okay, there you go.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. It's nice to see you all. I was with you about a year ago talking about the same subject. And so we did another survey of Juneau residents. You can go on to the next slide, please. I should have mentioned, this is Heather Hoagland with McKinley Research Group. We did a telephone survey, 500 randomly selected residents, the same sample size as last year, an appropriate mix of cell and landlines to reflect how the population uses their phones. We based the survey instrument much on last year's survey. I've got something going on my screen. Sorry, it all just blew up. Oh, I'm back online. Great. Something strange happened there. All right. So we, we repeated a lot of questions from last year, and a lot of the questions last year were repeated from these surveys we had done back in 95, 98, 2002, 2006. And I'll share with you some results comparing year over year changes. In order to qualify for this survey, we made sure that our respondents had lived in Juneau last summer, so they could answer, or I guess this last summer that we just finished. Last year when we did the survey, we asked about summer 2019 because of course the summers of 2020 and 2021 were so impacted by COVID. Maximum margin of error of 4.3% at the 95% confidence level. And I'll show you a little bit of how our data compares by neighborhood and by age, and talk a little bit about that on the next slide. We also looked at how people responded differently depending on where they lived in Juneau. Of course, that really affects the level of impacts that you feel, as well as by gender, whether they worked in the tourism industry, their age, and those sorts of things. All those gory details you can find in the report. I'm going to do more of an overview today. Please, the next slide. All right, so we compared our survey sample with the Juneau's population in terms of neighborhood and age, and you can see how these compare on this slide. So as you can see, there's a little bit of a difference in terms of neighborhood, with 39% of the survey sample being from the Mendenhall, or residing in Mendenhall Valley, versus 46% of the population. And just see a few percentage points difference as you go down the line. And we did decide to weight by neighborhood just because, the level of impacts you feel from tourism does really depend on where you live. We also weighted by age, and that is a very common practice in telephone surveying because older people tend to be more willing to pick up the phone, more available. Younger people less interested in participating in these kinds of surveys. So while the middle age groups are fairly representative, you can see, or fairly reflective, you can see that 18 to 24, 25 to 34, there are little bigger differences there, and then on the older side too. So those were our two weighting factors. You can
Ms.
please go on.
Hoagland,
Yes.
hold on. We have a question from Ms. Hale.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Thank you very much, Ms. Hoagland, for being here. Can you just somehow kind of explain what you mean by the data was weighted?
Sure.
I mean, like technically, what did you do with the numbers to
Okay.
do that weighting?
Well,
Ms.
let's
Hoagland.
take, I'll just try to use something a little less complicated. So let's say you have a population that's half male and half female. And but your survey sample actually turns out that men were much more interested in taking the survey. They were 75% of your sample were men. So then you're going to take their survey responses are going to represent, they have less weight in the final numbers. So we looked at unweighted. First, we look at unweighted responses, and then in our data processing, we assign more weight to the responses of people that are underrepresented, assign less weight to the responses that are overrepresented. I'm sorry if that, I know it's a bit complicated, but that's kind of that's the gist.
That is exactly what I needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Sure. Next slide. All right, so this is a big important question that we've asked in every one of our surveys in one way or another. Do you feel the visitor industry has an overall positive impact, negative impact, both negative and positive impacts, or no impact at all on your household? As you can see, the most common response is that the visitor industry has both negative and positive impacts. So 41% of people said that. When you get down to positive versus negative, people were a lot more likely to say that overall the industry has a positive impact at 35% versus 7% who said it has an overall negative impact, and then no impact at all at 16%. The folks who said both negative and positive impacts, as we have in years past, we asked the follow-up here in the yellow. Among those who responded, both negative and positive impacts, do you feel the positive outweighs the negative or the negative outweighs the positive? And you can see here that people were more likely to say the positive impacts outweigh the negative at 49%. Negative impacts outweigh positive at 32%, and 12% saying neutral or neither, or saying they don't know. Next slide, please. So those responses compared over time, you can see things aren't changing much year to year. The only difference that showed a statistically significant change was both positive and negative. More people said, yeah, I feel both. You know, we experience both positive and negative impacts. That went from 33% in last year, 2021, up to 41% in 2022. And just to provide a little context here, as we did last year, we have some cruise ship passenger numbers here along the bottom of the screen. So you can see that over the years where the survey was held, or at least the years the survey was referring to, that cruise ship passenger traffic went up significantly from 741,000 in 2002 to about 1.15 million in 2022. That's a preliminary number, but I bet it's pretty close. We're going to get final numbers in the next week or two. Yeah, and you can see that even though in this final, in this bottom table, we refer to 2019, even though we did the survey in 2021, just as a reminder, we were asking people in 2021 to think back to impacts in 2019. So yeah, not much of a difference here year to year.
Ms. Hoagland, I have a question on this slide. You did these survey in 90, a couple in the 90s, but you only show the comparison from 2002. Is that because the 90 numbers are similar to 2002?
I believe the nature of the questions changed significantly over that time, so it wasn't comparable.
Well, it's just as your methodology bullet says some questions repeated from previous surveys, 95, 98, 2002, 2006, and 2021.
Yeah, in this particular question, that it wasn't consistent going back that many years.
Okay, thanks.
Next slide. So again, similar to a question we asked last year, was your household very impacted or very affected, somewhat affected, or not affected by these impacts? And you can see crowding at Mendenhall Glacier is up there as sort of the most impactful. And note that some people And when they responded this, they may have felt, well, I don't go to the glacier and that's how I'm impacted, as opposed to, oh, I go to the glacier and I feel the impact from the visitors. So that was really up to the respondent interpretation, but I just wanted to let you know that that was an interpretation of this. So crowding at Mendenhall Glacier at 36% very affected. And then you've got crowding on sidewalks downtown. These are all adding up to about 56, 57% total impacts. Vehicle congestion downtown, flight seeing noise, air emissions from cruise ships, vehicle congestion outside of downtown, whale watching, boat traffic, and wakes. We did add the phrase "and wakes" in the 2022 survey, just recognizing some people do feel that impact and may not be thinking of it when you hear whale watching, boat traffic, and then crowding on trails. So that kind of orders them in most impactful to least impactful on a household level. And as it notes, these don't all add up to 100% because some people said they didn't know. Next slide, please. In terms of how impacts changed year to year, you can see things didn't change too much when you add together those somewhat and very affected categories. You can see that vehicle congestion downtown went down by a few percentage points from 57 to 51. Flight seeing noise went up 5 percentage points, and air emissions from cruise ships went up a few percentage points as well. Congestion outside of downtown up a little bit as well. But very, very much, yeah, we're talking pretty small percentage point changes. Next slide, please. So this question asks, do you think CBJ is doing more than enough, not enough, or just the right amount to manage the impacts of the visitor industry? The most common response was not enough, followed closely by just the right amount. So that was at 45% and 41%. Just 4% said more than enough. And 10% said they didn't know. So you can see, again, not a huge difference year to year. Nothing that was statistically significant, with 45% staying the same for not enough, and then just the right amount going up a couple percentage points, and more than enough going down a few. So really pretty close responses year to year. Moving on. All right, so this question asked, currently the maximum number of cruise ships that can be accommodated in Juneau's harbor at the same time is 5, 4 docked and 1 at anchor. Are you very supportive, opposed, or very opposed to CBJ working to limit the number of large cruise ships per day in Juneau's harbor to 5? Nearly half of folks said they were very supportive. Another 28% said they were supportive. So total supportive was 74%. And then opposed, you've got 14%, very opposed 4, for a total number of opposed of 18%.
Ms. Hoagland, we have a question.
Sure.
Ms. Yuskianis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Hoagland, I believe in I believe it was last year, we had asked how many ships was right, because I saw a graphic where it's 1 ship, 2 ship, 3 ship, 4 ship, red ship, blue ship. And we were surprised that those had also remained similar over time. Was there a reason we didn't ask that this year? Or I didn't see in any of the slides that we had asked that.
Yeah, you know, Alex, or the team we worked with at CBJ, it wasn't found to be useful or valuable this year to ask that. I think, you know, with you guys still so close to really to getting to an understanding of a limit of 5 ships a year, it's like, what can we do with that information? Alex, do you want to add anything?
Ms. Pierce.
Madam Deputy Mayor, I think Ms. Hoagland did a pretty good job of covering it. You know, it's unlikely that we're, you know, going to work to limit the number of ships to 1, or 2 or 3 or even 4. And so we wanted to get public feedback on our current policy direction and the current thing that we're working on. And if we find some sort of other limit question to be valuable in a future survey, this is something that I think can evolve sort of year over year. There's a value, Ms. Hoagland and I found in kind of debriefing the survey calling. There's a value in kind of giving people who want to vent the opportunity to vent in the survey a little bit. But in this case, we wanted to make sure that we were getting data on the work that we're trying to do today. And I think this will evolve and adapt next year on the heavy assumption that we're not sitting here again talking about a 5-ship limit.
Ms. Hale.
If I could follow up on
Go
that.
ahead. Yep.
Thank you for answering that question, and thank you, Mrs. Candies, for raising that question. Can you provide us with a little history on where that 5-ship limit came from? Like, why did we settle on 5 ships? Where did that number come from?
Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So the first place that I saw a 5-ship limit discussion was around the long range waterfront plan. That was carried in 2004. And that was with the 4 docks that exist in the acreage that exists today. That was carried forward in the Visitor Industry Task Force and was a really key recommendation of the Visitor Industry Task Force, which I'll talk about later. And so that's the number that we've been working with, because that has been our capacity for the past 20 years or so since the AJ dock was built. We, as in more modern times, as we've gone into hot berthing and practices like that, our capacity is kind of artificially bumped up a little bit. But the idea is at holding the line at where we are and not allowing for growth in the form of another ship. We're really good at managing for docks and managing growth through infrastructure at a ship or at a dock serving a ship. And that's been our approach to growth management in the past. And so as we move forward and entertain conversations about a new dock, we're stepping up these discussions about maintaining our current capacity.
Okay, Ms. Hoagland, proceed.
Sure. That was a good memory. I just remembering that average number of ships that should be allowed in the harbor, that average stayed the same. So yeah, that good memory. And I think we just decided is that actionable or not? You know, how valuable will it be in the survey? Next slide, please. We have a new question this year. CBJ is considering developing a public transit option for visitors to access downtown and popular attractions. We asked for their support or opposition. So supportive, over 2/3, 69% were supportive, including about a quarter that were very supportive, and then opposed 20%. Next slide, please. This was also a new question. We asked, should the CBJ Tourism Department place a high priority, medium priority, or low priority on each of the following items? And the number 1 item, or the one that earned the highest high priority responses, was limiting the number of large cruise ships per day to 5. Other higher priority was reducing traffic congestion, followed by shore power or dock electrification, developing a public transit option for visitors, supporting the development of additional hotel capacity, renovating Centennial Hall, and extending the Seawalk. So you can see about twice, you know, the difference in that 60% being the most high priority, 60% saying this, limiting the number of cruise ships per day is a high priority, versus about half of that saying extending the Seawalk is a high priority. Next slide, please. So we also sort of forced people to make a choice. We said, of the priorities I just mentioned, which one do you think is most important? And the responses really line up well with the previous question. So limiting the number of large cruise ships per day, followed by shore power, reducing traffic congestion, etc. I wanted to add also, we followed this up, and this is one of those things where when we were designing the survey, we wanted to give people a chance to say what they felt. And so this was a good opportunity where we said, what priorities haven't we mentioned that you think should be for, you know, that should be taken into account? A lot of people mentioned parking. Some people mentioned, let's see, the public transit. There were several sort of more popular suggestions. And we have all of the verbatim responses in the report. So that'll be finalized by the end of the week. But it's nice to give people a chance to say, oh, I think CBJ should do this or that. Next slide, please. So I didn't cover everything that we asked. There were a few other questions, and in the report, we'll also have a lot of differences by subgroup, whether people were more inclined to say one thing or another, depending on where they lived or maybe where they worked. We also compare on that front. You know, if you work downtown versus in the valley, do you feel impacts in a different way, or do you have a different opinion on things? So that report should be finalized by the end of this week. And yeah, Alex, do you have anything to add?
I just want to thank Heather and her team for doing a great and professional job on another survey. They were calling in a really tough election environment and managed to get the data that they needed. And you know, we'll rethink our survey timing next time it's an election year.
Surprised you got anyone to answer your phone call, Ms. Hoagland.
That was rad.
Thank you, and we look forward. So it sounds like we'll get a report in a week or so. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely by the end of the week.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
More questions? Are you all good? Okay, you can go away if you wish.
All right.
Thank you very much for coming. Okay, Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So I think the survey results being relatively similar to past years is a good segue into the conversation that I'm hoping to have with you this evening. Knowing that tourism management is going to be a major discussion focus at the retreat, I wanted to talk about the Visitor Industry Task Force implementation, and of the major policy directions of the task force, where we're at with that, and then some of our long-term options. And in discussing this with Mr. Watt today, we think that the best approach is to talk through what we're doing now tonight, and then touch on where we could go in the future, but really let that conversation be the meat of the discussion at the retreat, with the hope that what we talk about tonight and the results that Ms. Hoagland presented and the full survey report that you'll get later this week help provide the context you need for those more complex discussions. So I'm just going to walk through the memo that's in your packet sequentially and touch on each of the things that that are in there, and Mr. Watt will jump in on. So first and foremost, the Assembly never fully adopted the Visitor Industry Task Force recommendations. As you may recall, we submitted that report as the cruise industry and the rest of the world were rapidly shutting down. I remember Mr. Watt sitting next to me in this exact configuration and saying, you know, this is the final report of the do we still have a Visitor Industry Task Force? And so the Assembly's focus was very rightly, very quickly moved away from tourism, which was not happening. So we've received direction from this body to accept the recommendations and work on implementation. But we've heard persistent public comments that people want the opportunity to testify. They want the opportunity to have a public process around those recommendations. So my recommendation on that is that rather than bringing all 62, I think, recommendations in front of the Assembly for adoption, many of which are implemented, some of which are like staff policy, easy decisions, others come to you in the form of appropriations, that the assembly directs staff to bring back a resolution that adopts the core concepts that the task force recommended, the big picture items. And for those of you who either were part of the task force or closely followed the task force or were involved in its drafting, that's very much what we did with the 2002 tourism management plan. It's a big bulk, and the assembly of the day adopted a resolution that that puts in place the core principles of that plan. And I would suggest a similar approach with the task force recommendations. And those core concepts that I've put forward in this memo, and I'm certainly open to discussion about what else could go in there, are the 5 ship per day concept that was very loud and clear throughout that entire process. Completing the sea walk, increased ship scheduling input and transparency. We've had some movement on that, and I'll get to that. Dock electrification, and developing a strategy for meeting community and regional goals for emissions, congestion mitigation, and proactive industry management. These are all big topics, and I think it's appropriate that we have a public process and discuss our policy direction on those. So I guess I'll pause here and ask if anyone has any questions on that kind of first concept.
One thing I'll note is that both we've lost both our remote assembly members to other obligations, so it's just us chickens here in the room. Questions right now? You want to come, Madam Mayor?
I just want to reiterate what Alex or Ms. Pierce, excuse me, has said, that this will be one of our meaty topics that we discuss in length at the retreat. So please pay attention to what she has to say, and please read your Visitor Industry Task Force recommendations before you attend. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Deputy
sorry.
Mayor.
Hold on, Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to say, in general, I like your suggestion that these 5 topics, actually, that the public have that we formally adopt them and the public have an opportunity to comment on them, that we did indeed miss. So thank you.
Good. Ms. Go ahead.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
just
Use Candice.
a question and comment and process, and I appreciate this, and I appreciate the recommendation that we have an additional public process. When we say we adopt these, I assume that's backwards. We have a public process and then we adopt these. We don't want to adopt these and then have the public say, I'm mad you adopted those, or I'm glad you adopted those. So I just wanted to say that.
Indeed, but and everybody, we all dropped off in spring of 2020, so it's time to drop back in. You got it, Ms. Tree.
Yeah, just a little comment for us on the assembly. I think this is a good idea where we tackle these big 4 or 5 topics through this process. There's a lot of littler ones that the task force came up with, and those might come to us as like appropriating ordinances or something. And when we see them, and if it says the Visitor Industry Task Force included this in their recommendation, we can still have the discussion about its appropriateness at that time, even if it's not in these big 5. So I just wanted to bring that up because there are so many of those little ones.
Yes, and this is to make sure that these are the 5 we want to do. If there's 64 and somebody says there should be another one, so that's Madam Mayor's notion of read it again and see if there's more. Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And I will make sure that the full VITF report is in your retreat packet, along with the colorful and large spreadsheet with each one of those recommendations and their current status.
Thank you. I don't know when the retreat packet's coming out, but you can send that sooner rather than later. Don't wait for the
Okay.
retreat packet.
Happy
Whenever
to
you
do
get
that.
it together. Yeah. We could send links or whatever you have. Thanks. Okay, now really go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And I will also add that for those of you who are on the Lands, Housing and Economic Development Committee, Ms. Perry and I have been doing quarterly updates. And so you can see the progression of that spreadsheet through old packets if you really, really want to get into the details and do not have enough information being thrown at you in your role as assembly. So moving on to the these kind of key goals of the task force. The first goal, the 5-ship limit, which we talk about a lot. Where the task force states that we should negotiate a formal agreement with the industry to limit the number of ships to 5 larger ships per day, 1 ship at each dock, or 4 ships at dock and 1 at anchor if the 5th dock is not built or if a 5th ship chooses to anchor instead of dock. So we are working on an agreement with the industry about that right now. I have learned, Mr. Bryson asked me a few months ago what the biggest thing I have learned in my year or so in this position is. And I think the thing that I've learned the most is how slow the industry moves on things like this. You know, we've had positive discussions with the major lines calling here. We've had positive discussions with CLIA about it. CLIA discussed it at their board meeting in early November. There was a positive outcome from that. And I still don't have any signatures on the agreement. And that's just that there are a bunch of large multinational corporations trying to get to a negotiated agreement on something that is straightforward but affects them. And it kind of takes one to move for the rest to move. So we're working through it. And like I said, I've had positive responses from everybody. So I don't, at this juncture, I'm confident that we'll have a signed agreement. The other prong that we're approaching is doing a 5-ship agreement with the private dock owners as well. We have an opportunity to put that into a negotiated lease with one of our potential future private dock owners. And we've broached it with the other 2 dock owners. This would protect against a cruise line that's not a member of CLIA, wasn't signatory to the agreement, from entering the market, making a deal with a private dock owner, and suddenly being the 6th ship in port without a lot of control from our end. So
Ms. Pierce, let me ask you a question about the negotiated agreement. The goal obviously is to get. And when is the deadline for that? And are there any more reluctant than other agreement people? I mean, when does the,
Right.
no, I'll stop.
okay, so here's, I will say 2 things. First, I have a draft schedule for 2024 that cruise line agencies put together that gets us to 5 ships. And it reduces our volume, and it just, looking at it compared to 2023, it feels more manageable. I wouldn't say that we have more reluctant parties, but I got some feedback the other day from one of the major cruise lines that I thought was really interesting, because it just shows our very different ways of thinking. So we have this 5-ship agreement. We dock ships right now through a historical berthing, priority berthing model that we have no real interest in altering significantly to change who's coming on what day. We might want to move a ship from one dock to another, but we don't want to alter it significantly. The concern coming from the cruise line was that if we were doing a 5-ship limit, we would want to maximize passenger fees and maximize dockage fees and stuff the 5 biggest ships we possibly could into our harbor in order to make as much money as possible. And of course, a cruise line would think that way. That's how their market, or that's how their business works. And so, it's in some ways, it's kind of trading on assurance that no, we're not going to push your luxury line that has 600 or 700 passenger ships out of the market. We want them here. Those are great passengers. They spend a lot of money. They help with our congestion mitigation because they're smaller. So that was, I kind of bring that aside up to show that it's not the concept of it. It's kind of just a different way of thinking about the world.
Right, well, how we think, and they assumed that what we wanted was the biggest possible all the time. Yeah. Mayor.
Thank you. And that's one of the discussions we'll have a little bit on our retreat, because I don't think that's the intent of not only the assembly, the community, to have the biggest ships that we possibly could have. So it is, as Ms. Pierce says, just a different mindset. So just keep that in mind when you're reading your packets.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So moving on, within the 5-ship discussion, the task force extensively discussed scheduling and the concept of best ship at best dock. So the 5-ship limit is a first step. The very early and wonderful schedule that Cruise Line Agencies has provided me with is a first step. Additionally, we have been meeting as the Port Communities of Alaska for a few years now, and Juneau, Skagway, Ketchikan, and Sitka sent a joint letter under the Port Communities of Alaska banner asking for increased regional transparency and context on scheduling to help inform the discussions in our communities. And so there's a lot of changing dynamics in the region right now. Skagway has landslide issues that are closing docks there. That has affected, Icy Strait Point considers that a positive effect. They're a private port that's in that business. Sitka, much more mixed reaction. So, and they've kind of equally received the Skagway loan. Haines, much more mixed reaction. Juneau goes to 5 ships. If there's 6 berths in Ketchikan and a number of berths spread out north from us, what does the 5-ship limit mean for the rest of Southeast Alaska? I mean, we're at 5 ships now, but as things grow, what is that going to mean for our regional neighbors? And so I really want to see us work kind of diligently on a regional strategy in the next few years. And this is a really great first step to that. I think the door is another good opportunity for us to work together on things. But that concept of transparency was well received. We were told by everybody that it makes sense. So we'll see what that looks like next year.
Ms. Treem.
Thank you. I like that. I feel pretty strongly we should be working as a region. Who is involved in that Port Communities of Alaska group? I assume the 2 of you. For other communities, is it also kind of municipal staff?
Pierce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Yeah, it's municipal staff from all the different ports. city managers, tourism people.
Go ahead.
So the next topic is waterfront management. So we also talked a lot about the Seawalk at the task force. It's kind of the beginning of a dynamic time on the waterfront. We're working on, we just had our initial meeting with our consultants today on the new Marine Park Master Plan. Ms. Kester and I have been working with the landowners between the Franklin Dock and AJ Dock on a potential agreement on that Seawalk project. And then depending on what happens at the subport and the Coast Guard's future plans, we have some opportunity possibly at the north end of town for Seawalk projects as well. So on top of that, Docks and Harbors has spoken to you recently about bond packages for shore power. So that may change the way that our passenger fee budget looks. If things happen in a really positive way and all of this good stuff lines up at the same time, and we have all of these projects, that means that more passenger fee money goes toward debt service than kind of little one-off projects. And so that's another kind of long-term decision and discussion that we need to have. I also, in the section about methods for achieving goals, I talk about the restricted lease method. That's specific to Huna Totem. That's specific to getting some of CBJ's needs met on the waterfront as part of that discussion as well. Do you have anything to add there?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So on the waterfront management question, I think we are motivated at the subport to figure out exactly where, if we're going to approve a dock, exactly where that dock should go. Huna Totem gave a nice presentation several weeks ago, but they did not detail that exactly where part. And you'll recall that they let us know that the Coast Guard had declined to continue to participate. We don't know exactly why. There's a lot going on with the Coast Guard. But I think as a municipality, we are motivated to make sure about that exactly where portion for a number of reasons. In the visitor task force liked the idea that the dock was located as a hedge against anchoring. So if you couldn't anchor a big ship because of the location of the dock, that was a popular idea that would limit through infrastructure. I think we are motivated as the municipality. I think we can have a different relationship with the Coast Guard and try to engage the Coast Guard in port planning. I think that in terms of navigation of the whole harbor, we have a different motivation and need than Huna Totem's approach. I mean, their approach really is develop property and a dock. And I think we are the ones to link all those issues together. Mr. Yucatel is traveling. He's not here tonight. I think this is a good task that we can have Mr. Yucatel and his experience and project managers work on in concert with Ms. Pierce and myself to try and figure out that exactly where question. I think you will also get questions from the public about view planes. So if the Huna Totem proposal came forward and somebody said, what's it going to look like? You know, and I think that's going to matter to people. And we're gonna need to work on that. So in the next probably month or two, we'll work together to bring forward a proposal to work on that exactly where question. And when we talked about dock electrification, we talked about 16B being version 16B. And it was because the port director and the board, Docks and Harbors Board, labored all those exact issues. If the ship goes here, what happens to this other ship? And what's it going to look like? And is it going to block my view? And is it going to mess up navigation to the harbor or the cruise ship dock? And should there be a gap between the two boats? And should there be berthing on the inside? There are many questions that need to be answered. And I think CBJ is the entity to resolve all that.
And we specifically already asked Mr. Yucatel that question, how does it affect other plans, et cetera, since it was a big black box and completely empty. Madam Mayor.
I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but since Mr. Watt is bringing this up, we may actually look as a city to answer a lot of those questions is whether we are interested in building that dock in combination with Hunatotum and NCL using marine passenger fees and other money. So that might be a discussion we also see is whether we should stick our fingers in because then we would have more control.
So Ms. Pierce, we are going to take a break or your sounds like how much more do you have? Okay, 10 minutes. Okey doke. So we are starting again. And Ms. Pierce, we are on emissions reduction? Is that where you are? Are you passed?
Nope, we are on emissions reduction.
Okay.
So thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Emissions reduction, we're working on dock electrification projects. You've been abreast of those. We're still working on the Green Corridor project. It was agreed that the cruise lines and the home ports would fund a feasibility study. With the idea that Southeast ports would have to use passenger fees, and some ports are in the position of needing to use every single passenger fee dollar they have for operations, and that we should have a united front on that. So
Emissions reduction question, Ms. Hale.
I think this might be more of a comment than a question, but I certainly did notice when the Huna Totem people were here talking about the Norwegian dock, that they kind of sort of passed the buck a little bit on the emission on the dock electrification, saying that they didn't think there was shore power available. And perhaps I'm just making the point that we need to make that point more strongly with them, it seems. Thank you.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Hale. I had the same concern, although I thought I heard them say that they were going to, what's the right word that they use? Preset or make it where that electricity could come to them. So like pre-pipe it. So when electricity is available, that the infrastructure was already in place. So their desires there. I don't remember what phrase they used for that though.
It kind of depends on how much, we did that for our docks too, but it's still millions to hook us up. So how much pre is in their planning is unclear, right? I mean, are they like just need to plug it in, or do they need another $20 million to do it? We don't know, because they're very sketchy on their, the sketch we saw was sketchy. I don't mean sketchy, but I mean, it was not filled in. Yeah, on the details. Okay, go ahead.
so thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And there's actually a lot to unpack with that one. The NCL purchased the property and said, we'll electrify the dock. It'll be great. That is a really complicated project. It likely involves a submarine cable from Douglas. It's a very expensive undertaking with where power is now. On top of that, with our current power capacity, what we're hearing from AEL&P is that we're in a good position to electrify another dock, to electrify the steamship dock. And then, we should have a bit more of a discussion about our capacity before moving forward with more projects. And so, from that perspective, without some amazing new technology coming online that would allow an alternative power source for electrification or something like that, I think the intent is there, and I think the discussion around at what point do you get electrical utilities built is certainly a valuable discussion for your negotiations with Huna Totem. But I think, we also kind of need to recognize some of the constraints of the site and our power capacity, which I don't think was kind of taken into consideration when that initial promise was made to the community and those initial discussions were had. Not to say it's impossible, just that it's third in the queue behind our two docks, and you know, we have kind of more feasible projects.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and thank you very much, Ms. Pierce. I will just point out, additional capacity is not impossible. And I will just point out that up until fairly recently, AEL&P was saying that the other dock electrification projects were impossible. So I'm just not going to let this one lie quietly, because we need to keep dogging it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, maximizing local benefits.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So this is mostly around, I've discussed the Port Communities of Alaska group already, and promoting, advocating for local benefits, as well as you will recall the discussion from earlier this summer about medallion pay. We have promised to go back and work with the industry on a solution that works for local merchants and works for local communities. And that's something that it's a task for this winter that I've done some initial work with Jamie Bricker and Skagway on, but we need to hit that one in earnest.
Ms. Tree, and then Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'll bring this up at the retreat too, so we don't have to get into a discussion about it tonight, but I'd also really like to work on the idea that's come up before of a regional sales tax scheme, as I would say. And so I want us to keep that in mind as well.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. The information I heard about the medallion pay stemmed from the 18% take. Were there any other complaints about that, or did it just never get take off the ground because the percentage commission was too high for the local merchants? What other issues did this medallion pay run into, please?
Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. The 18% was the big one. There were also some concerns about the way that it was marketed. Leave your wallet on the ship, and you can use your medallion to shop. So that would exclude local businesses that were not participating in a program and paying 18% from customer traffic. And the way it was rolled out and the way that it was marketed to local businesses was, I think our industry folks that we talked to would agree, pretty problematic. And we have all agreed to kind of have some discussions this winter about how port shopping in Juneau works and the rest of Southeast Alaska.
Okay. Centralized tourism management. That's you.
That's me. And there's a bit of a push-pull in our tourism management world. So I think I'm going to let Mr. Watt, as the overseer of the push-pull, take this one.
Mr. Watt.
Deputy Mayor. So tricky change that we're making. So, you know, the VITF recommended centralized tourism management, which resulted in the creation of the tourism manager position. And, you know, there are some overlapping and complexities in the roles. Mr. Yucatel is not here, but we talk a lot about the waterfront. And is this a Docks and Harbors thing? Is this a tourism manager thing? Is it a manager thing? Is it a Parks and Recreation Department thing? And we need to kind of clean that up. And this is not a criticism of anybody. And it's not you know, anything more than an acknowledgement of, you know, we created the tourism manager position, which was a very good thing and is very well received by the cruise ship industry. Yet we have on the books things that say, you know, general powers, Docks and Harbors Board shall generally exercise all powers necessary incidental to the operation of all port and harbor facilities in the public interest in a sound business manner. Well, except that the assembly is interested in the public policy, or and except that the assembly wants to take the lead on the subport planning, except that we're going to have this more centralized tourism function. So we're all doing fine with it. We work through it, but it is tricky. And I think for certainly the Docks and Harbors Board, I mean, if I was on the Docks and Harbors Board, I might be saying, what's my role on the waterfront with regard to cruise ships, right? It's not exactly clear what we expect of the board. It's not exactly clear what we expect of the department, so we'll be, I think that's why Ms. Pierce handed this over to me. So it's a work in progress, as are all things municipal.
Thank you. It's a long standing work in progress. It's just and it's not just the tourism management, it's the docks are our downtown. And so the assembly has long for decades been in and out of, wait a minute, we want that thing. And so it would be awesome to have those conversations and just figure it out instead of what you're doing now, which is kind of tiptoeing around it. Ms. Hale, Ms. Tree.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and I agree with you. And it's been my observation, although I have never been liaison to the Docks and Harbors Board, but it's been my observation that the Docks and Harbors Board, a large percent of their attention is on harbors, and a very small percent is on docks. And so I really like the idea of officially moving docks towards the assembly and the manager as appropriate.
Ms. Treem, and then Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Watt, what do you need from us to work on this issue?
Through Deputy Mayor, nothing at this time. And I just want to point out, Docks and Harbors does a number of great things, not least of which are maintenance and operations of complicated municipal facilities, billing, troubleshooting lots of things, provision of water and sewer. So it's not just a simple like, oh yeah, Ms. Pierce, like you do all those things,
No.
right? There's a whole department that manages a lot of infrastructure. But given the assembly's interest and attention on policy issues, I think it's important that we resolve this. And I think given that the public by and large sees the assembly as the body to come testify to on cruise ship issues, I think that's important to clarify for them as well. So we will make proposal and figure out how and when to do that.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Watt pretty much stole my thunder on that one.
Yeah.
I think policy wise, we're probably pretty interested, but day-to-day operations, and if we decide to build another dock, we'd like to keep it Docks and Harbor under Mr. Yucatel and his great staff.
Yeah. Okay. Ms. Pierce, scheduling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Madam Mayor, for that last comment. So scheduling, I think I've covered this in sprinkles throughout this discussion. It's a work in progress. One interesting complexity is that we have no contractual relationship with cruise line agencies, and they schedule our docks, they provide provisioning, they work on our docks. And recently Port of Skagway called me to try to get our contract with them because they're setting up their port for the first time, and they were shocked that we didn't have one. So that's something that the assembly may want to consider, and that's something that could be a discussion point at the retreat. Do you have anything to add to that, Mr. Watt?
No, I would just a little stronger. I mean, I think it's a foregone conclusion that we need to put cruise line agencies under some type of contract. We don't have any other municipal facility that we let an independent entity schedule without some clear contractual relationship and some clear direction on how to do that.
Yeah, I appreciated that. That clearly says that, and that's just it's like jumps right out at you.
So thank you, and moving on. This is the methods for achieving goals is really the retreat discussion. I'll just skim through them quickly and kind of give an overview of the pros and cons. And there is a lot of nuance between pro and con in each one of these. So regulation, pros, it's really easy to pass an ordinance. Cons, it can be really messy on the backside of passing that ordinance with the industry and other players. Negotiated agreements, the pros, they're collaborative, they're preferred by the industry, they're positive. The one we signed about garbage and screens and stuff, CLIA is using as an example of like one of the great things that one of, their destination stewardship achievements this year. It's something that the industry wants to work on in an environment where more and more ports are looking to limit tourism, and we're kind of breaking ground and leading the way on that, and that's cool. Cons, they take a long time and they're negotiated, which means give and take. Restricted lease with Huna Totem is kind of its own little subcategory. I don't think there are particularly cons to doing a restricted lease if we decide to pursue that development as a city. I think we need to carefully consider our relationship with Huna Totem, and you've heard Mr. Watt and I both say a number of times that there are a number of things in the visitor industry task force recommendations around construction of another dock that are far beyond the capabilities or control of one cruise line or one dock owner. So we need to consider all those complexities, how we're working on all those other pieces. And as we move forward in those discussions with Huna Totem and consider our long-term goals for the waterfront in the decisions that we make with them. Mr. Watt wants to jump in.
Deputy Mayor, just one last thing on a restricted lease. You have to think of everything up front, right? So you have to have really good future vision and get every restriction down up front. Because once you do it, then it's hard to get back to what you didn't anticipate.
So the final management option is ownership authority. This is acquiring private docks. And the pros is that acquiring private docks, becoming a port authority, provides us with the ultimate flexibility and control. The cons, it's really expensive. It takes a really long time. We don't have interested private dock owners in selling at this juncture. So, it could be a long-term stated goal, or it's a more complex discussion that we need to have at the retreat. And, that includes Mayor Weldon's statement about the potential fifth dock.
Any comments about any of that? Everybody's petering out.
Yeah.
Okay.
You've read my conclusion. It's pretty straightforward. So I had in my notes here under recommendations, do you want us to draft a resolution now or consider it at the retreat? But I think given this discussion, it makes sense to move that conversation to the retreat, give people the opportunity to reread the task force recommendations and have that discussion at that time.
Any comments or more questions, things you want to know? Things you want to know before the retreat, information you want, anything?
Through the deputy mayor, if I may, if there's any packet materials that you would like to see, please let me know.
Ms. Hale,
Will you be giving us a hard copy of that report? That's just really helpful. Thank you.
of the one today, you mean?
The VITF.
Oh, VITF, okay. Ms. Treem and Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Can you guys give us a map of the different docs and their names? It's hard for me to keep them straight.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Pierce, for that lovely presentation and your recommendation, which we'll take care of at the retreat. So I was just talking about the retreat. So right now it's December 11th, which is a Sunday. It will be at the VRH boardroom for all of us. And it's scheduled right now for 10 to 4. And before you freak out at the 4 o'clock time, we're just making sure that we have enough time to finish, and we will actually be taking a physical lunch break. Staying in the room, though, you're not running off to do chores, but I'm just reminding everybody. And not only do we need to read the Visitor Industry Task Force, I would be remiss to say we also need the Housing Action Plan needs to be read too before that. So that's your homework, as long as anything else you have to add on the goals, which I would guess that we haven't seen much on those except for from a couple of you. That's pretty clear, but we're going to go through housing in much more detail, tourism, and the budget, which we'll talk about on Wednesday. So thanks.
And I'd appreciate, I know that you get a packet together a few days before, but if you could just even send us links to those things that are big beforehand, the housing thing too, that would be great. Unless just anyone needs a paper copy. Thank you, Ms. Pierce. This was great. It's a good thinking, just get us thinking about this again. And we'll talk some more at the retreat.
Thank you.
Property tax appeals and codifying the Board of Equalization rules and procedure. Is that you, Mr. Palmer?
I'm gonna kick this over to Mr. Gottschalk.
Mr. Gottschalk. You're on, sir. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me back. So this is the third time that this is coming before the cow. I just wanted to note, since time is of the essence here, we do have Chair David Epstein in the audience. He is going to be leaving shortly to pick up his wife from the airport. So if you have any questions for him while he's here,
thank you.
keep those in mind.
Let's just, you're like leaving now. Any questions for Mr. Epstein, Ms. Tree?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Epstein, for sitting through this whole meeting. I know the board has looked at this, just want to get your thoughts on these proposed changes, whether you think they're the right ones. And
the ones from the chamber, you mean? Or no?
The things in the ordinance that are changing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Through the chair.
I'm not sure your button's pushed. Okay.
That good? Thank you, Ms. Treem and Madam Mayor and Madam Deputy Mayor. The board scrupulously went through the draft ordinance, and what you see before you represents the considered sentiment of the board. And I think, we're codifying some of the things that we've been doing. One of the items in there is the stipend. I think, we're operating at the bare minimum level now, and I view it as a recruitment and retention tool, and hopefully it will do that. I saw in the Chamber of Commerce letter the concept of increasing the number of board seats now, and personally speaking, I'd prefer that we hold off on that and see how this incentive works. So.
And I know the board hasn't had a chance to look at any of those comments from the chamber or anything. But is there anything you can say about any of them or have any comments on them?
Madam Deputy Mayor, thank you for asking. I did pen some the appellant and the assessor may agree to waive deadlines. I would like to see them try and work to a mutual agreement. And then if that fails, then they come to the board for determination. The issue of training, consistency, in my opinion, is not the issue. There is a perception on the part of some appellants that we're not treating everyone equally. We have Mr. Godchalk guiding us at every hearing. So we all sit through the training. The state assessor comes down every year, runs us through the latest statutes and updates, and I think we're well trained. Provision of guidance for the appellants, I think that's a good idea. Assessor transparency, I had no objection to that. One of the good things that this ordinance does is it provides, in the case of a late filed appeal, 5 minutes, where we really haven't had that formally put into process before. We really haven't had a lot of late appeals, but this is good. And then I've already spoken to the board capacity, so.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you looking at that. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I just want to do a comment, not a question. I just wanted to publicly thank Mr. Epstein. I don't know if everybody knows that to try and keep things consistent, he tried to attend every single Board of Equalization meeting, and we truly appreciated that. And on top of that, he chaired many of them. So thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
And that was, we know it was a lot of time this time than you ever bargained for. So appreciate you not hanging in there. More questions for Mr. Epstein so he can go away and pick up and not have to listen to us anymore.
Go quietly into.
It's not you, it's us. Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming again and all that work. Okay, Mr. Gottschalk.
All right, so thank you, Assembly, and thank you, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to reiterate some of the values and principles behind these amendments. A lot of them codify longstanding BOE procedures that have been tested throughout many hearings, most of them chaired by Mr. Epstein. And they have worked for our appellants and process generally. I also want to note that by codifying these, we are making them publicly available to everybody, all taxpayers, all potential appellants and appellants, instead of them receiving them from the assessor in the months or weeks before their actual BOE hearing. And I believe that by putting these into code, we're going to be providing more explanation and guidance for appellants so they know exactly what the BOE process entails, what they need to do or what they need to show in order to prove their case or have their case judged on the merits and not spend time on anything that may be immaterial or unhelpful for their case. And it will, ultimately facilitate BOE review of assessments on the merits. That is the guiding principle behind the system of exchange with the assessor. It creates a very structured process so that material is coming to the BOE timely. There have been instances where we get document dumps in the day of, in the afternoon before, to the point we're not sure what material we're looking at and using multiple packets. And I know Deputy Clerk Cathcart remember some of those well. So these overall, and as a reminder, these are all procedural changes. So we're not changing the burden that any of the appellants need to meet. We are not changing the assessment process. So the burden comes from state statute. The assessment process is really all through the assessor's office. So that's beyond really the scope of the BOE. The BOE is the neutral body of 5 volunteers picked from the community who are spending a lot of time reviewing the material submitted by the appellants. So they, as Chair Epstein noted, they have no objection to assessor transparency. We would all like to know more about what's going on so that we can ultimately get to the merits of every appeal. So if anyone on the assembly has any questions, I am happy to start fielding those.
Who has questions for Mr. Gottschalk? Anybody? Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Gottschalk, does this maybe streamline or give a better set of expectations to any appellants? Do you see these changes as being positive for the appellant to make it easier to navigate the appeal process if somebody has to appeal an assessment?
Mr. Gottschalk?
So I think if, as far as streamlining, I think it does clarify the expectations and it can give some sort of structure so that it would make it easier for appellants. I think especially useful is the chart on page 43. I think that visual is a lot easier to use and understand the process. And this is something that could be made available, whether it's through the website, whether it's from communication with the assessor, to all appellants and the public at large. And I think this process will clarify their expectations. We do envision, and another kind of consideration behind a lot of these amendments is that any member of the public who is a property owner should be able to, or their representative should be able to do these and understand this process without requiring any sort of professional representation. So I do believe this would make it easier for anyone who wants to appeal.
Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Thank you. That was the exact explanation I was looking for. The only last comment that I wanted to make is that anybody interested, any citizens interested in volunteering to serve on the BOE, that application is open until November 30th, so Wednesday night. So anybody listening to this right now, I wanted to include that since the chair of HO. Was that not accurate, Madam?
Madam,
If I might, Deputy Mayor, we are constantly advertising for a number of open seats on the Board of Equalization, and it would be a miracle if we had the number of applicants needed to fill all the vacant seats on that board at this time by Wednesday night. And we continually advertise, and they are continually vacant. We have 9 seats on the board altogether, Mr. Bryson, and we only have 5 of them currently filled.
so in other words, there's no
No
deadline.
deadline. Okay. Well, that's even better for all of the citizens out there that would like to apply to be on the Board of Equalization. You can apply at any time to join the Board of Equalization. Thank you for that corrected information, Madam Clerk. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Madam Mayor?
And I also need to thank Mr. Gottschalk and Madam Deputy Clerk, because they often also got to see all the Board of Equalization things. But I'd want to put pay especially attention to the chart, because Mr. Gottschalk came up with this on his own after meeting with me. I said, that makes things so much simpler. And he also included, we asked him about a list that the appellant is to bring, and it's included on there. So thank you for doing that.
We love simple charts. We have-
And Ms. Glashevsky, I have an amendment when you're ready.
Madam Mayor,
I mean, a motion when you're ready.
go ahead.
I move. Sorry.
Here it is.
Number 2022-21 to the full assembly. And I'd like to offer an amendment.
Madam Mayor, tell us your amendment.
All right, so we met with, well, I've actually had 2 conversations with the Chamber Board, but we met with them today with Mr. Gottschalk and Mr. Palmer to work on this, and in their memo to us, the 2 things that we felt that we could take care of simply were to extend the time allowed. So let's pass out the amendment so you guys can look at that. But basically, it's just a little bit allowing a little bit of flexibility. And when you get that, I'll talk about it. It's pretty simple. It's on your packet, page 11. So package page 11, it just adds the underline,
Sorry, Madam Mayor, it's not package page 11.
I mean, ordinance page 11, packet page 39. It just adds on line 4 after the word assessor. Upon finding good cause, the presiding officer may extend both the appellant's initial presentation and the assessor's presentation by equal amounts. So this is in case there is a really complex piece of property and they might need more than the granted 15 minutes. One of the things I did learn is they have 15 minutes, but if you want to save time for rebuttal, that's the amount of time that they'll give you. So say Mr. Bryson wants to appeal something and he wants to save 5 minutes, they'll only give you 10 minutes up front, so you don't accidentally use all your time, which was something I learned from Mr. Gottschalk. So thank you for that. And then number 2 is, this is the attorney speak to continue the relaxation that makes the attorney happy. So that is on page 12 of the ordinance, packet page 40. Line 19, you would add this D, and basically, well, I should just read it. Relaxation of requirements. This section is designed to facilitate the business of the board and shall be construed to secure the reasonable, speedy, and inexpensive determination of every appeal. The procedural requirements of this section may, in the discretion of the presiding officer, be relaxed in any case in which a strict adherence to requirements will work in justice. And this is kind of for the person that has no experience and doing the best they can coming before the Board of Equalization, and they just may need a little help or guidance or a little bit more time, and this gives the presiding officer that liberty to do that for that person. So with the first thing, that attorney thought that we should have something in the whole ordinance that gives just a little bit of flexibility as needed. And then another piece of, I'll just talk briefly on that. Another piece of the chambers was the assessment process and codifying that. That doesn't have anything to do with the Board of Equalization. And we are asking the attorney, oh, we can direct you to come up with an ordinance that will start working on codifying our assessment process for people. So that made them happy with that too. So, but for right now, we have a motion and the amendment.
Okay, so is there a question on the amendment, the 2 parts of the amendment? Any questions for the mayor on the amendment that she is offering to insert into the ordinance? Okay, so that's approved to add this to the ordinance, add these to the ordinance. And then the second thing she just talked about is separate. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor and Madam Mayor. Thank you for directing the attorney to work on the an ordinance about the assessment process itself. Mr. Attorney, I think what I'm really looking for is something that is not quite as opaque as what we seem to have now, but instead it's easier to see what's going on. So it's easier for the people who are being assessed to see what's inside that black box, so they actually know how to go forward if they are going to appeal. Thanks.
And hopefully it can reference some standards that someone already made and that we don't have to make up. So
It will reference a standard that we couldn't remember the acronym, but
yeah,
Association of Assessors or something.
right, exactly.
AAAO or
AAAO,
triple OA, we couldn't remember, but we'll make sure there's whatever that the assessor's office uses.
Okay.
Just forgot Chuck will have some homework, so.
I'm looking for
Ms. Uskanis.
Ms. Uskanis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. My hand was half up because I'm not sure. Are we finish with this. Is that so moved? No objection.
So amendments and it's going to the assembly.
Great.
We're done.
So we move this ordinance.
We
We're
moved to
done.
the assembly.
We moved to
Yes,
the assembly.
yes, ma'am.
Great. Then just a quick comment, since Mr. Bryson was announcing to the wonderful citizens of Juneau that they could apply at any time to be on the Board of Equalization. I just also want to say, if you see an ordinance you don't like, you too can send in amendments and write us letters about them. And if you are clear, and let us know what is wrong with our ordinance and send in thoughtful amendments, those too can be included with our packets, and you too can meet with the mayor and staff and perhaps see your amendments moved to here, because I just feel like that's important to say, because we appreciate the chamber, but we don't want to give the chamber so much weight that we are not giving equal weight to our citizens. So just reminding folks to get involved in the process. It's a contact sport.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candy's very good points. We want to hear from everybody. Oh, yeah. The chair of the, Madam Clerk, could you tell us the due dates of the applications for the things that do have due dates that we're about to interview for?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And I'm going to look to my amazing Deputy Clerk to verify that we have a deadline of November 30th to receive applications for the Planning Commission and the Hospital Board. Is there any others that I'm missing? Okay. And then at this time, I believe December 14th is the date scheduled for those interviews to be held with the full assembly sitting as the Human Resources Committee. So as soon as the applications come in, then we'll send out the advance interview questions and get that ball rolling in advance of the 14th.
Okay, so Wednesday, just 2 days from now, for the Planning Commission and BRH. Anything more to come before the Committee of the Whole? We are adjourned.